China has provoked India yet again. Once again, troops from both sides have clashed, and once again, there have been injuries. This is Galwan playing out all over again. In our cover story tonight, we will tell you all about this. The latest clashes took place in Tawang. It is located in Arunachal Pradesh. This is where it is on the map. We will play out those visuals for you. Chinese troops clashed with the India side on the 9th of December. That's last Friday. What triggered those clashes, we don't know for sure. Reports say at least 600 Chinese soldiers were present during the event. Several Indian soldiers have also been injured. Many have sustained fractures, and the soldiers are now recovering in a hospital in Guwahati. We are being told the Chinese side suffered more injuries. Reports adding that the two sides have now disengaged following a flag meeting between the local commanders. What makes this story huge is that this comes just 2 years after the Galwan clash. On the 15th of June 2020, remember, the PLA clashed with the Indian forces in Ladakh's Galwan Valley. 20 Indian soldiers died, several others were injured, and China never came clean with its numbers. But some estimates say Chinese fatality figure was anything between 35 to 42. China first said its death toll was 4, and then Beijing revised it to 5. China followed this up with honoring a PLA commander who was involved in the Galwan clash, and this commander's name is Chief Abao. He was chosen by the Chinese Communist Party to carry the torch of the Winter Olympic Games. In October this year, she was also handpicked to attend the opening of the Communist Party Congress. So China has, in many ways, tried to provoke India following Galwan. What happened in Tawang, though, will not be the first time. The two sides have had previous face-offs in Tawang. In October 2021, the Indian army detained some Chinese soldiers following a minor face-off and clash between the two sides. What is clear, though, is that tensions are rising along the LAC, or the line of actual control, again. With me on the broadcast this minute is our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal. Also with me is Professor Madhav Narapat, Vice Chairman of the Manipal Advanced Research Group. Let me come to you first, Siddhant. Just piece together for us the latest that you have at this point, any statement that's been issued by the Indian side.
Well, Molly, very concerning development coming when it comes to the clashes, the face-off, the term which is being used by the Indian sources. We know that there have been injuries on both the sides. What is significant that it is coming in Arunachal Pradesh, because previously in 2020 we saw the Galwan clashes in eastern Ladakh, and now it looks like the focus could shift to Arunachal Pradesh. China, of course, has been staking its claim on Arunachal Pradesh, calling it as South Tibet, but largely the development, the incident is coming at a very, very fragile time for India-China relationship. The relationship has been going southwards since the Galwan incident, and now this development has come. It has come at a time when we know that India has made it clear that whatever happens at the border will have ramifications in the wider relationship.
Right. Siddhant, hold that thought. Professor Narapat, let me quickly come across to you. What is your assessment of the latest that we have at this point?
Well, Molly, I'm surprised if anyone is surprised at this. The reality is that we have an X factor in China, and that X factor is called Xi Jinping. And he has made his objectives very transparent. In September, at an international forum, the Chinese side released a map showing the whole of Arunachal, the whole of Ladakh as part of China, and the rest of Kashmir as part of Pakistan. They've been quite open about it, and this is the X factor. Please understand one thing: the Chinese are aware that the one country in Asia that can take away a lot of the industries that are now based in China, that can offer an alternative in terms of brain power, in terms of manpower, and also in terms of, if I may say so, domestic market, is India. And they want to cripple India before India reaches that stage of viability in which a huge flow of investment flows from China for geopolitical reasons and lands up in India. So this is something which, frankly, should have been expected. And, I'm a little surprised that I still meet people who talk in terms of doing, agreements, ceasefire, other things. The reality is that the Chinese are aware that India is the one potential future competitor. And like the Americans before them, the Chinese want to cripple an aspiring equal before that country is anywhere near being an equal. So my only surprise is that anyone is surprised by this.
Right, Professor, let's just also take a step back and talk about the way China has behaved ever since Galwan happened and the way the provocations have continued, both at the border and elsewhere as well.
Look, the fact of the matter is Xi Jinping has built his reputation not on economic growth, that's tanking, not on the rise in living standards. This current generation is basically worse off than the previous two generations of Chinese citizens. He's built his image on being a strong man with the military front and center. He needs military victories. Unfortunately, he's got a walkover in some of these areas. For example, he grabbed territory from the Philippines. The United States did not object. And he honestly believes that with this situation going on in Ukraine, and you'll recall, I've been saying from the start, the Chinese will continue this Ukraine war well into 2023. And that is now coming true. Why? Because all the oxygen of NATO and the United States is sucked there. And therefore, Xi Jinping believes he has a clear field in the Indo-Pacific. So what we are seeing is basically Xi Jinping's strategy. It has not changed. It did not change in Galwan. And may I say one thing? Look at the building of infrastructure that they're doing. That infrastructure is not defensive at all. Look at the kind of equipment that they're mobilizing there. Look at the airfields. Look at the missile launching sites. Are these defensive? Not at all. They're offensive. And which country are they aimed at? They're aimed at India. So again, I repeat, I'm surprised anyone is surprised.
Right. And what do you make of the very fact that the disengagement has been reported about earlier? Talks have been taking place, several rounds of talks that have taken place. But at the end of the day, the messaging that China tries to send out and portray to the world and contrast that with the situation on the ground.
Look, the Chinese, frankly, are very good at giving messaging that basically makes the other side relax its guard. They're very good at that. But at the same time, you must say, Xi Jinping has said repeatedly, now you yourself mentioned about how this chap was involved in the Galwan clash, frankly, when he was in illegal occupation of that territory, and he was evicted there fairly. He's been made a hero in China. What does that mean? It means they don't recognize its illegality. Frankly, Xi Jinping is saying all Chinese territories will be taken back. All Chinese territories as defined by Xi Jinping, not defined by the rest of the world, not defined by the UN or by international law, but by Xi Jinping, will be taken back. And if necessary, by force. Even on Taiwan, he has said, I will take Taiwan back during my tenure in office. He has given maps, as I told you. This is the person we are dealing with. And what we need to do is to ensure that we have this kind of an offensive enemy on our borders and take steps both by ourselves and by allies to ensure that this be countered. So the next time there is a major attack by China, that country gets a very nasty shock and surprise. You have to have the deterrence. And the only thing that will work is deterrence and not diplomacy. Diplomacy, frankly, is what the Chinese often do to lull another country into abandoning deterrence. What we need is strong deterrent, and no amount of strong diplomacy can compensate for that.
All right, Professor Nalapat, we're leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much for joining us on the broadcast. I want to go back across to Siddhant just to help us piece together the latest that we have at this point, Siddhant. The tensions escalating once again at the line of actual control. Injuries have been reported on both sides following those clashes between the Indian and the Chinese forces. What do we know so far? And any reaction that has come in?
Well, so far we know that the Indian sources have confirmed that the face-off took place and there have been injuries on both the sides. But what is awaited as of now is what's the situation as of now at the line of actual control in Tawang, in Arunachal Pradesh? Because remember, today is the third day since the development happened. It happened on a Friday. It happened on 9th of this month. And secondly, the Chinese reaction. So far, there hasn't been any Chinese reaction or Chinese confirmation as to what happened at the line of actual control. But of course, it's almost way past midnight in Beijing. We could expect some kind of reaction tomorrow morning as to what is the Chinese view. But nonetheless, this is a concerning development, and we do expect this to be raised by the political parties, especially the opposition in the parliament tomorrow, given that the Indian parliament session is also underway.
Right, and Siddhant, for the benefit of our viewers, let's also talk about the way those talks have gone about vis-a-vis the disengagement between India and China as well.
Well, since the Galwan incident in 2020, we saw a number of rounds of conversation between India and China, both at the military level, at the diplomatic level. In fact, the foreign ministers of the two countries and the defense minister have had conversation as well on the sidelines of various multilateral events. And this has led to disengagement in eastern Ladakh, in Pangong Lake and other areas like Hot Spring. But nonetheless, there are friction areas still existing in eastern Ladakh. And the focus, of course, is to make sure that there can be a disengagement when it comes to next round of conversation. But when it comes to dealing with the Chinese, the hopes are not very high. We know that Chinese have a tendency of backtracking on their commitments, and this is something that India has multiple times pointing that how the Chinese were the first to violate the 1993 and 1996 Pact of Border, that there will not be amassing of troops, and this is something that the Chinese started to do in April of 2020, and then that led to Galwan incident, and now it looks like the focus has shifted. Already there was worry over developments in eastern Ladakh, but Arunachal can become the next area of flare-ups given that how the Chinese have been acting on. But nonetheless, this is symbolic and essentially shows that how the relationship has been going southwards, and we do expect some kind of reaction as well from the Indian side of the Indian government, perhaps by the defense minister or the Indian external affairs minister.
Right, and we will come back to you as and when we have those fresh updates and that reaction coming in from the Indian side. We are leaving it there for the moment. Siddhant Sibal getting us up to speed with the very latest on those clashes. Thanks very much. And we're staying on with news from China. Here's another question that we have been talking about on this show. Is China trying to hide something when it comes to its COVID-19 chaos? Another question that we want to talk about tonight. The trigger is China's handling of the COVID-19 virus? Is there more to it than meets the eye? It seems to know something that the rest of the world does not. Maybe another wave, another deadly variant, or something else that's imminent. And I say this because China is preparing for a sharp rise in COVID-19 cases. It is setting up medical facilities around the country. ICU beds are being ramped up. The country is preparing for the worst. But why is that even happening? Well, the virus cases in China have fallen apparently. On Sunday, for example, China recorded a little over 10,800 new cases. A day ago, that number was above 10,800. So things seem to be looking better. In fact, much better if you account for the 30,000 plus daily cases that China was reporting just a couple of weeks ago. What then explains the scaling up of its medical infrastructure? Why is China building the new medical facilities and the hospital beds when cases are falling? I'm not saying countries should not prepare for emergencies. Of course they should. It is the duty of every country and its government to ensure that there are enough hospital beds to cater to its population in times of crisis. Also, the need to ramp up medical infrastructure is one of the many things that countries have learned from the first few waves of the COVID-19 pandemic. They are installing oxygen plants, adding new wings to their hospitals, making provisions for new ICU beds. But China is different. You cannot read China from the same lens that you see the rest of the world. Because in Xi Jinping's China, things are rarely black and white. So when China is building hospitals with the speed that it is, it's more than just concern. China is likely confused on how to deal with this virus, or it is hiding something. Which one of the above is more likely? The point about confusion stems from the fact that Chinese policies are not in sync. On one hand, the country is relaxing the zero COVID measures, and on the other, it is ramping up the medical infrastructure. You see, after almost 3 years of ordeal, the people of China are finally being allowed to get a slight taste of normalcy. Mass testing has been scaled down, and it has ended large-scale lockdowns as well. Mandatory quarantine in central facilities. China is telling the world that it has moved on from President Xi Jinping's signature zero COVID policy. Take, for instance, what happened earlier today. China retired its major COVID-19 virus tracking app. It's called Communications Itinerary Card. The phone application tracks whether a person has been to a high-risk area, and the Chinese had to show their card, the itinerary card, while traveling between provinces, entering public spaces or events. And this app was extremely symbolic, almost like an emblem of China's zero COVID policy. This app was run by the state, and it goes offline at midnight. The move is being hailed as a milestone. Some are calling it the end of an era. Long story short, China is throwing the towel on tough COVID-19 restrictions, or you could say it's being forced to do so. You remember the protest that rocked China a couple of weeks ago? Hundreds were out on the streets of major Chinese cities protesting, sloganeering, calling for an end to zero COVID, also for an end to the presidency of Xi Jinping and the rule of the Chinese Communist Party. Like I was telling you back then as well, the protest had shaken the Chinese power center. China had not seen such uproar, such civil disobedience since the Tiananmen Square uprising of 1989. Beijing was quick to react. It offered an olive branch to the protesters in the form of relaxed zero COVID policy. And even when it was not in a position to, we have been telling you, people know this and they are evidently scared. People have been panic buying drugs, hoarding and eating way too many peaches. The rumor doing the rounds in China is that yellow peaches can help recovering from the virus, while eating oranges can lead to a positive antigen result. And such is the commotion that the Communist Party has had to step in. Its mouthpiece, the People's Daily, had to warn people against falling for these false beliefs. And what this shows is that there is a fear in China that the mayhem could come soon, that the virus may become out of control. Is that what explains these new hospitals, or is there more? In China, there is always more to what meets the eye, so one cannot help but ask, is China hiding something? Does it have knowledge of an imminent wave? What is it that China is trying to hide? Meanwhile, the zero COVID protests in China started from Xinjiang, a predominantly Muslim province, a province that Beijing has turned into a police state, a province where it is undertaking a cultural and religious genocide. Yet, the same China has the audacity to preach to others on what's right and wrong. Let me explain this. Last week, the Chinese president went to Saudi Arabia, a visit aimed at strengthening China's ties with the kingdom. But Xi Jinping used this opportunity as a chance to swing himself into the politics of West Asia. How is that? Have a look at this headline. Chinese President Xi affirmed support for Palestine's full UN membership. Yes, China, which is inflicting unimaginable cruelties on the Uyghurs, has backed Palestine's case for a United Nations membership. The development is ironic. What the Chinese president said, even more so. Speaking at the Riyadh Gulf Chinese Summit, he voiced frustration over the quote-unquote historical injustice suffered by the Palestinians. Let me quote his exact statement here. We firmly support the establishment of a fully sovereign Palestinian state on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. It is not possible to continue the historical injustice suffered by the Palestinians. I repeat, it's not possible to continue the historical injustice suffered by the Palestinians. Now, I don't want to delve into the Israel-Palestine debate. It's a matter best left for the United Nations to solve. What I want to highlight here, though, is the Chinese president's hypocrisy. It is a bit rich that he speaks about Palestine as his regime cracks down on the Uyghurs at home. As you know, Uyghurs are Muslim minority groups that live in Xinjiang and northwestern China. Uyghurs are essentially Sunni Muslims of Turkic ethnicity. They have their own language, their own culture, and their own cuisine. They don't look Chinese, they don't want to feel Chinese, but they are forced to act Chinese. According to reports, a total of 10 million Muslims are said to live in Xinjiang. Almost 2 million are in jail, and those who are not are under watch. They have to deal with the world's most sophisticated surveillance system on a daily basis. There is police at every corner of the street, checkpoints every few kilometers, and cameras that scan everything from number plates to faces to body parts. China says it's doing all this to curb terror, and the world sees this as persecution. Look at this headline. The United Nations has called Xinjiang one of the worst cases of human rights violations since World War II. My point is, Xi Jinping's support for Palestine reeks of double standards of the highest order. It is nothing but an empty gesture, one that will only benefit China and not the Palestinians. You see, lending support to Palestine suits China's interests in West Asia. It contrasts Western support to Israel, giving Beijing a chance to integrate itself in the region and enhance its growing romance with the Arab countries. In recent years, China has significantly increased its economic, political and security footprint in West Asia, so much so that it has become the biggest trade partner and an external investor for many Arab nations. Now, China wants to take things a step further, especially after America's withdrawal from the region and its worsening ties with Arab nations. And this has created a vacuum of sorts, a vacuum that China wants to fill. How does it plan to do that? Well, besides making investments by having a say in their affairs. And this statement by Xi Jinping on Palestine only proves this. The question is, how will Israel perceive this? Has it responded to Xi Jinping's remarks? So far, it has not. But given the growing friction between the two countries of late, Israel's growing security concerns over Chinese tech, its growing wariness of Chinese investments in West Asia, it's only a matter of time before it issues an official response. And our next story is about the Taliban. It's proving to be a menace for Pakistan, the same Pakistan which vouched for the Taliban. It's now caught in a bitter border standoff with it, standoff which is only escalating. Look at what happened on Sunday. An attack along the Pak-Afghan border killed over 6 Pakistani civilians and injured at least 17 others. Who was behind this attack? Who else but the Taliban? A group that Pakistan fed and nurtured. A group that Pakistan said had mended its ways. The same group is now attacking Pakistani civilians. It looks like a classic case of chickens coming home to roost. Islamabad says this attack was unwarranted. There was no trigger from their side. It was the Taliban which launched indiscriminate fire and unleashed a spree of unprovoked bombing. The images are disturbing, to say the least. They show victims being carried on stretchers, ambulances rushing to the attack site, firefighters trying to douse the flames as buildings lie covered in debris and ashes. The eyewitness accounts are equally distressing. People say they had to remove mortar shells themselves. Listen to this.
This mortar fell from the Afghan side. I was very near it. I picked it up and removed this. This is like catching the enemy alive. By the grace of Allah, we are ever ready to sacrifice our lives for our country.
When we were at the crossing border into Pakistan, the firing started. After that, we ran towards the warehouses. First, a mortar shell landed which was directed towards the village. It caused a fireball. A large group of people were standing outside the petrol pump with us. Again, a mortar shell landed and caused a huge fireball. After that, I lost consciousness and I don't know what happened.
So where exactly did this attack unfold? At the Chaman border in Pakistan's Balochistan province. This is one of the 4 major border checkposts between Pakistan and Afghanistan and a key route for bilateral trade between the two sides. Thousands of people from both sides use it daily. But in recent weeks, tensions have spiked here with frequent reports of attacks and cross-border firing from both sides. For instance, on the 13th of November, an unidentified Afghan man killed a Pakistani guard here, and this led to both sides open firing at each other. Pakistan responded by shutting the border and blocking all cross-border trade. The issue remained unresolved for weeks. It was only towards November end that the border was reopened. Barely 2 weeks on, there has been another attack, this time from the Taliban itself. And the question is why? And the answer depends on who you ask again. Like I said, Pakistan says the attack was unwarranted, but the Taliban do not agree. They say Pakistan provoked first. How exactly? By trying to stop them from building a new border checkpost. At least that's what the Taliban are claiming. They say that Pakistani authorities had been installing new fences for weeks now, but when they did the same, the Pakistani side objected. And this led to a quarrel which ended in violence. That's not even all. The Taliban say that they even lost one soldier, with some Afghans suffering minor injuries. So who do we believe? Well, given how we are talking about Pakistan and Afghanistan here, a terror state and a terror regime, it's really hard to tell who's speaking the truth. But here's what we do know, and this wasn't the first border clash of this kind. It definitely will not be the last. Here's why. For months now, Pakistan and Taliban have been arguing over the Durand Line, this 2,700-kilometer-long border which separates the two sides. This border was drawn by the British, but it was rejected by the Afghans, primarily because it divided the Pashtun communities. A historical headache that has resurfaced since the Taliban came to power. The Taliban have refused to endorse the Durand Line. They say there should be no borders among Muslims, especially not among the Pashtun community, which comprises Taliban's ranks. In fact, why just the Taliban? Since 1947, successive Afghan governments have rejected the Durand Line. They have promoted the cause of one Pashtunistan, the home of Pashtuns. Pakistan did not want this, so what did it do? It built seminaries, promoted radicalism and armed the Pashtuns. Islamabad hoped that this would make Islamic nationalism overshadow Pashtun nationalism. In fact, combating the creation of a Pashtun state was a constant preoccupation of General Zia-ul-Haq, the chief of the Pakistan army who seized power in the 1978 coup. Between 1978 and 1988, General Zia opened close to 1,200 madrasas in Pakistan, 1,200 seminaries in 10 years. Most of them were in Pakistan's northwest. These madrasas were used to suppress Pashtun nationalism, and around the same time, Afghan jihad was gaining momentum. The Mujahideen, with the support of the United States, were waging their holy war against the Soviets. Pakistan backed the Mujahideen, killed two birds with one stone, loyalty from the Mujahideen and money from the Americans. The CIA funneled money and equipment to the ISI. The ISI trained the Afghan Mujahideen. In the 1990s, when the Soviets had left, the Mujahideen crossed the border to Pakistan and enrolled at the Darul Uloom Haqqaniya, Pakistan's University of Jihad, a sprawling Islamic seminary situated barely 35 miles from Peshawar. The Darul Uloom Haqqaniya is essentially a terror factory. It openly teaches Muslims about jihad and routinely churns out dreaded terrorists, including the top brass of the Taliban. They were exposed to the Deobandi movement and radicalized further, and then they went back to Afghanistan and formed the Taliban. There are quite a few of them. Mullah Akhtar Mansoor, the co-founder of the Taliban, was from the Darul Uloom. Mullah Omar, another co-founder, had an honorary doctorate from the Darul Uloom. Plus, the Taliban's newly appointed water and energy minister, Mullah Abdul Latif, the telecommunication minister, Najibullah Haqqani, the education minister, Abdul Baqi Haqqani, and the minister of refugees. Of course, they have one, Khalil-ur-Rahman Haqqani. The Darul Uloom Haqqaniya is their alma mater. And it doesn't even end here. The seminary got open state support from Islamabad and sent terrorists to wage the holy war in Afghanistan. That said, the Darul Uloom is just one piece of this puzzle. For decades now, Pakistan has been running a sophisticated network of financial, political, diplomatic and military support to the Taliban in order to make Afghanistan its sixth province. I'm not saying this, Pakistan's own leaders are. Listen to this statement by Sheikh Rashid Ahmad, where he openly admits that the Taliban were bred by Pakistan's deep state.
और ये जितने नौजवान यहाँ मुहाजिरों में पढ़ते रहे, कई बड़ी माजरत के साथ, मैं अब वजीर दाखिला हूँ, रेलवे में होता तो शायद और ज्यादा बातें कर सकता था, मेरी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी है। कई ये तालिबान लीडर जो टॉप हैं वो पैदा पाकिस्तान में हुए, पढ़े पाकिस्तान में, इसमें तो पाकिस्तान की खिदमात हैं कि इनको हमने तालीम दी और अब भी कई पढ़ रहे होंगे।
You heard that. It was our service to bring them up. This is a former Pakistani minister talking. The question is, what did Pakistan expect in return from this service? The attainment of strategic depth against India, using the Taliban to further its Kashmir obsession. This was the prime objective of Pakistan's Afghanistan policy, a policy that is now proving to be costly, with consequences that Pakistan is not ready to bear. Because this is not a Taliban that depends on Pakistan for its survival anymore. This is a Taliban in power, a Taliban the Americans call businesslike and professional. It might just become the tail that wags the dog, because old loyalties rarely stand in the way of fresh temptations. And this attack along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border only proves this. Moving on, at least one member of the European Parliament has been caught selling Europe's sovereignty to Qatar. Before I dive straight into this story, let me ask you a question. What is the image of the European Parliament in your head? I'm guessing a holier-than-thou body, picking all the right battles, legislating on all the woke matters, and lecturing the world on how to conduct itself. Tonight, I will bring you a tale of the truth beneath the surface, the truth beneath the smiles and the sermons. Meet Eva Kaili. She is one of the vice presidents of the European Parliament. Kaili is from France, is from Greece. But if you recently heard her speak at the Parliament, you would mistake her for an envoy of Qatar. Listen to this and you will know what I'm talking about.
Today, the World Cup in Qatar is a proof, actually, of how sports diplomacy can achieve a historical transformation of a country, with reforms that inspired the Arab world. ILO said that Qatar is a front-runner in labour rights, abolishing kafala, introducing minimum wage, despite the challenges that even European companies are denying to enforce these laws. They committed to a vision by choice, and they opened to the world. Still, some here are calling to discriminate them. They bully them, and they accuse everyone that talks to them or engages of corruption. But still, they take their gas. Still, they have their companies profiting billions there.
Well, that's a great sales pitch, is it not? Why do you think a member of the European Parliament was so passionately defending Qatar? Well, because she was being paid for it. Kylie was working for Qatar. She was lobbying for Qatar. This vice president of the EU Parliament was taking money from Qatar to influence European decisions in favor of Qatar. If I had to put this in one sentence, Kylie was selling Europe's sovereignty to Qatar. And it's called corruption. It is called abuse of office. Since when has Kylie been talking in Qatar's favor, has been on Qatar's payroll? We know she has had a seat in the European Parliament since 2014. In fact, she has been the chair of the Future of Science and Technology panel ever since. Kylie has also been recognized as one of the most influential MEPs as per the Digital Influence Index. Now, we know who she was influencing on behalf of, not the people who voted her to office, but Qatar, a country that regularly sent Kylie paychecks and gifts. And how much money am I talking about? Prosecutors in Brussels found over $631,000 hidden in some 16 houses. They charged a total of 4 people. The European Union Parliament Vice President was one of them, probably the most influential of them all. Remember, Kylie had immense power, courtesy her position. She was a member of the Parliament's bureau. She was tasked with taking administrative decisions, staffing decisions, taking calls on organizational matters. She was also responsible for drawing up the EU Parliament's budget, but it seems that Kylie leveraged her position to strike deals with Qatar, to lobby for Qatar. Recently, the EU Parliament was voting on a resolution involving Qatar. Kylie raised eyebrows with her passionate defense of the Gulf nation. Some parliamentarians sensed foul play.
When we voted on the Qatar resolution in the last plenary week, there were already a lot of questions why some MEPs, for example, were tabling certain amendments, how the voting behavior of some MEPs was, also the speeches that were given. I mean, most notably the speech of Eva Kaili, who defended Qatar very vigorously. And I think this will have to be clarified, because obviously it's an absolutely unacceptable situation that members of a parliament take money and then consequently take certain political stances.
Notice this MEP is speaking in plurals, members raising eyebrows with their voting behavior. This is not an individual problem. This is an institutional problem. For all you know, Kylie is just one of the many MEPs who are sold out. For all you know, this vice president thought that she too will get away with selling influence, selling sovereignty. Was Kylie encouraged by the immunity offered to other members who too had sold their votes to some of the other wealthy country? Well, these are difficult questions that the EU Parliament will have to answer. Remember, this is a body that has lectured the world on foreign interference, criticized Russia on foreign interference. Look at this document. As recently as March this year, lawmakers of this very parliament were calling for sanctions against countries meddling in European affairs. The document presented read, and I'm quoting, "Foreign interference constitutes a serious violation of the universal values and principles on which the Union is founded, such as human dignity, freedom, equality, solidarity, respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, democracy, and the rule of law." Foreign interference is a pattern of behavior that threatens or negatively impacts values, democratic procedures, political processes, the security of states and citizens, and the capacity to cope with exceptional situations, whereas such interference is manipulative in character and conducted and financed in an intentional and coordinated manner. Just look at the irony of it all. The Parliament's very own Vice President has now been locked up. With what face was this body lecturing the world and delivering sermons when its own members are so corrupt? And with what face are European countries and football teams criticizing Qatar when its own MEPs are taking money to lobby for the Gulf country and write off its human rights records? Also, since we are talking about ironies, look at the European Parliament's website. It boasts of supporting the fight for democracy. It talks about fighting for free speech and fair election across the world. Such a rich agenda for a body whose own internal votes are rigged, where speeches are up for sale and election results can be bought in exchange of gifts. Back to my question, with what face does the EU Parliament deliver those sermons? On what basis does it project itself as the chief human rights defender? Because back home, its MEPs seem to have no problem doing business with human rights violators. Listen to what else the EU Parliament's Vice President had to say about Qatar.
They are a new generation of intelligent, high-educated people. They helped us to reduce the tension with Turkey. They helped us with Afghanistan to save activists, children, women. They helped us, and they are peace negotiators. They are good neighbors and partners. We can help each other to overcome the shortcomings. They achieved the impossible already. Thank you.
Kylie's case has put on display the levels of corruption in the EU Parliament, hidden beneath those smiles and sermons. And for all you know, Kylie's case has just scratched the surface. Today, the European Parliament's credibility hangs by a thin thread. And it's a wake-up call to all European countries to look within, focus on cementing the fault lines at home before they can lecture the world on what is wrong and what's not. What happens when your own immunity turns against you? When the antibodies that are supposed to save you change teams, or when the cells in your body start to replicate uncontrollably? It leads to cancer, a disease that claims the lives of over 10 million people annually. For years now, scientists have been looking for a cure, and finally, they have achieved groundbreaking results. Our next report telling you about this.
The doctors at the Great Ormond Street Hospital in the UK have done something that others only dreamt of. After chemotherapy and bone marrow transplant did not work for their patient, Alyssa, the doctors took a bold move. They turned to a new experimental treatment to deal with leukemia. So let's take a closer look at this revolutionary procedure, which is known as base editing. Bases are the building blocks of our DNA, just as letters in the alphabet make up words. The billions of bases in our DNA spell out the instructions for our body to function. While base editing, the scientists zoomed in on these bases and altered their structure. This helped them engineer new kinds of cells, which are capable of hunting down cancerous cells. What happened next would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. 13-year-old Alyssa became the first person to be cured by this method, and all of it was made possible by incredible advances in genetics. These results come after a long history of hit and trial. Doctors worldwide have tried their best to beat this deadly disease. Doctors worldwide have tried their best to beat this deadly disease. The founders of German company BioNTech have been trying to develop vaccines for cancer. Imagine if simply an injection could be the weapon to help win the fight against cancer. Now, you might have your doubts about that, but remember, the power of mRNA to produce vaccines wasn't proven until COVID-19 struck the world. But they are now one of the most effective vaccines to prevent infections. This success has encouraged scientists to dabble in this technology for treating cancer. BioNTech is running several trials. The vaccines have shown early encouraging signals. While all of these are sophisticated methods, some researchers are striving for a more natural approach. A study shows that potatoes might hold the cure for cancer. Here's what a team of Polish researchers believe. Potatoes are rich in naturally occurring chemicals called glycoalkaloids. These components have shown cancer-fighting properties. They could also help patients with devastating side effects of treatments. As bizarre as it might sound, but the scientists might be onto something. Plants have been commonly used to fight cancer. Chemotherapy drug Taxol also falls under this category. It is produced from tree bark. But before patients can gain from cancer treatments straight out of the vegetable garden, the mechanisms of the glycoalkaloids need more research. Scientists worldwide have now stepped up their game. Even though the number of cancer cases has increased over the years, the cancer mortality rate has seen a significant drop. Let's look at some data. In the US, breast cancer is the most common cancer of 2022, with over 290,000 new cases. The number of deaths recorded are around 44,000. Prostate cancer is the second most common, with over 268,000 new diagnoses. The death toll stands at 34,500. The figures are alarming, but if we look at the bigger picture, cancer deaths have decreased by over 30% in the last 3 decades. The reason for this gap is medical advancement. There are better drugs and treatment methods for cancer now. As a result, patients have a longer lifespan even after being diagnosed. The new base editing method is another step in the right direction, although the procedure still has some loose ends. Overall, it is a milestone for the medical industry.
On that optimistic note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas Tonight. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.